My name is Claire Dalton. I'm 33 years old, and I built the kind of life my family loved to brag about when it made them look good, and resent when it reminded them I no longer needed their approval. By the time this happened, I had spent over a decade working my way up in Manhattan, closing high-stakes hospitality deals, surviving on caffeine, delayed dinners, and pure stubbornness until I could finally buy the one thing that felt completely mine. An oceanfront house out in the Hamptons. I did not inherit it. I did not marry into it. I earned it. And apparently, that was exactly why they thought they were entitled to take it from me. It started at my brother's wedding, in a ballroom packed with 300 guests, where everyone was dressed like they were attending the social event of the summer and pretending our family was as polished as the floral arrangements. I had barely sat down before my parents pulled me aside with that tight, smiling look people wear when they are about to ask for something outrageous and still expect gratitude in return. What they wanted from me that night was not money, not a favor, not even a loan. They wanted my beach house as a wedding gift for my brother and his new wife, because according to them, a married couple needed it more than a woman living alone. When I refused, the whispers turned sharp, the pressure turned public, and my father decided humiliation would do what guilt could not. A second later, red wine was running down my face in front of everyone. Then the room went completely silent. And that should have been the worst part of the night. It wasn't. Because a woman at table 6 slowly rose from her seat, looked straight at my family, and changed everything. Before I tell you what happened after that, tell me where you're listening from today, and whether the mood where you are feels calm, tense, or somewhere in between. I followed my parents toward a smaller table near the back of the ballroom, the kind reserved for private conversations that were never actually private when they happened at family events. My father, Richard Dalton, was already wearing the expression he used whenever he had decided he was right, before anyone else had even spoken. My mother, Eleanor, stood beside him with a smile so polished it looked painful. My brother Mason and his new wife, Savannah, drifted over a few seconds later, both of them still glowing from the ceremony, both of them looking far too comfortable for people about to ask me for something insane. My father wasted no time. "Claire, let us make this simple," he said. "Mason and Savannah need a real place to start their life. Your house is perfect for them." I stared at him, honestly waiting for the punchline. Instead, my mother reached for my wrist like this was some tender family moment and said, "You are established, sweetheart. You're secure. You can build another life anywhere. But they need a strong beginning." I looked from one face to the next, hoping someone would break and admit this was a joke. Nobody did. My brother gave me a tight little shrug and said, "We would never ask if it weren't important." Savannah added, softly enough to sound reasonable, "It would mean everything to us." That was the moment I realized this had been discussed long before I arrived. This was not a spontaneous request. This was a coordinated ambush wrapped in wedding flowers and family language. I laughed once because I genuinely did not know what else to do. "You want my beach house as a wedding gift?" My father nodded like I had finally caught up. "It makes sense, Claire. You live alone. They are building a family." I said, "I bought that house with money I earned. I renovated it myself over 2 years. I pay every tax bill, every maintenance invoice, every insurance payment." My mother's smile tightened. "And no one is taking that away from you. We are asking you to do something generous." My father corrected her immediately. "No, we are asking her to do what family does." Mason stepped closer, lowering his voice like that made him less shameless. "Claire, you know I'm not where you are yet. The market's been uneven. Sales have been decent, but not enough for a place like that. It would change everything for us." I looked at him and felt something in me go cold. "You are 29 years old, married, and standing at your own wedding asking your sister to hand over a multi-million-dollar property because it would be convenient for you." Savannah bristled at that. "It's not about convenience. It's about priorities," I repeated. "Priorities." My mother jumped in. "You always do this. You make everything sound ugly when someone asks you to care about people more than property." That line would have landed harder if I had not spent the last 10 years quietly helping all of them whenever a crisis appeared. I had covered a gap in one of my father's projects when a lender pulled out. I had written a check when Mason was upside down on a lease he could not afford. I had funded a hospital-grade home care setup for my mother's sister without telling anyone else in the family, because dignity mattered to her. Not once had I brought those things up publicly. Not once had they thanked me in a way that lasted longer than the crisis itself. But now suddenly I was selfish, because I would not sign over the one thing that was mine. I said, "I have helped this family more times than any of you will ever admit." My father gave a dismissive wave. Money here and there is not the same as making a meaningful sacrifice. That nearly made me laugh again. My mother leaned closer and lowered her voice. "Claire, listen to yourself. A house is just a house. A marriage is a future." And there it was, the logic I had grown up with. My goals were temporary, my brother's needs were sacred. My accomplishments were negotiable, his milestones were untouchable. I said no. I am not giving Mason my house. I am not trading it. I am not co-owning it. I am not helping with the mortgage on something similar. No. Mason's face hardened. "You really want to do this tonight?" I answered. "You are the one doing this tonight." My father's jaw clenched. "Don't be dramatic. We were trying to keep this respectful." Respectful? He said that while standing at his son's wedding demanding my property like it had been sitting in the family trust waiting for him to assign it to the worthier child. My mother said, "It is one house, Claire. One. And if it means your brother and his wife can start right, why is that too much for you?" I looked straight at her and said, "Because it is mine." And for a second, nobody spoke. The music from the band floated in from the ballroom. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed across the room. But at our table, the temperature dropped. My father took one step toward me and said, "Then maybe you should explain that answer in front of everyone, since you seem so proud of it." We walked back toward the center of the reception with all the grace of people carrying lit matches through dry brush. At first I thought maybe they would let it go. Maybe they just wanted one final chance to pressure me before dinner. I was wrong. My father stopped beside our table, still holding his wine, and spoke just loudly enough that the nearest guests turned to listen. "Claire refuses to help her own brother," he announced, as if he were delivering tragic family news instead of performing public manipulation in a tuxedo. My mother joined in immediately. "She won't even consider giving them the beach house." Imagine being that attached to square footage. I felt heads turning all over the room. The smile froze on Savannah's face. Mason looked mortified for exactly 2 seconds, then decided it was safer to let our parents keep going. That told me everything I needed to know. I said, "Since we are doing this in public, let's be accurate. You are asking me to give away a property I purchased with my own income because you think my life matters less than his." My father snapped, "Don't twist this into some feminist speech. This is about family duty." My mother said, "A woman alone does not need an oceanfront house more than a married couple trying to build a life." There were audible murmurs now. People were listening. Really listening. My brother finally spoke. "Claire, nobody said your life matters less. But you have options. We do not." I looked at him and said, "You have 2 working adults, no children, and a wedding that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. Don't tell me you have no options." Savannah's expression cracked right then. She said, "You always make people feel small when you want to win." I almost admired the timing. It was the perfect line if you wanted to pivot from entitlement to victimhood. I said, "No, I make people uncomfortable when I say the quiet part out loud." My father stepped so close I could smell the red wine on his breath. "You have always confused success with superiority. That house should go to the people who will use it properly." I said, "Properly? What does that even mean?" He answered without hesitation. "It means people who understand family, legacy, and what matters." And there it was again. In his mind, I was not a daughter who had built something. I was a temporary holder of family assets he could redistribute whenever he felt like it. My mother looked around at the guests who were now openly staring and said, "Claire, please, do not embarrass us like this." I said, "I'm embarrassing you." Not the part where you demanded my house at your son's wedding." My father's voice sharpened. "Enough. You will stop being selfish and do the right thing." I felt something strange then. Not fear, not even anger. More like clarity. The kind that arrives when a situation becomes so absurd you can finally see it without hope distorting it. I said very calmly, "I will not give Mason my house. Not now. Not later. Not because you pressure me. Not because you shame me. Not because you think being my parents gives you the right to assign my life to someone else." For half a second the room seemed to pause with me. Then my mother said, "How can you be this cold?" My father lifted his glass with a hand that was already shaking, and then, because guilt had failed, and control was slipping, and 300 people were watching him lose, he did the one thing that would define the rest of his life. He threw the wine straight at my face. It hit hard enough to sting. Red liquid splashed across my cheek, my hair, the front of my dress. There was a collective gasp so sharp it felt like the whole ballroom inhaled at once. The band stopped playing, mid-note. Somewhere behind me, a fork hit a plate. Mason stood frozen. Savannah looked horrified, but not horrified enough to step toward me. Nobody moved at first. My father was breathing hard like he had not expected his own body to go that far. My mother whispered, "Richard." But it was too late for warnings. Red wine was dripping onto the floor beneath my heels. My vision blurred for a second, not from tears but from shock. I raised one hand, wiped my eye, and looked at my father through stained fingers. He actually had the nerve to say, "Maybe now you'll understand what public shame feels like." And that was when the silence shifted. It changed shape. It stopped being stunned and became watchful. A chair scraped the floor from somewhere to my left. Then a woman's voice rang out, clear and controlled and impossible to ignore. "No, Mr. Dalton. I think everyone here understands exactly what public shame looks like now." Every head in the room turned toward table 6. The woman standing there was Judge Helena Whitmore, one of the most respected civil judges in New York. Silver-haired, straight-backed, and visibly unimpressed. She set down her napkin, looked directly at my father, and said, "I have watched enough. No parent is entitled to bully an adult child into surrendering private property. What happened here was coercion followed by humiliation, and every person in this room just witnessed it." The room changed instantly, not because people suddenly found their conscience, but because someone with credibility had spoken the truth out loud. A man near the dance floor lowered his phone only to raise it again from a better angle. Someone at another table muttered, "My God." My father opened his mouth, but Judge Whitmore cut him off before a sound came out. "If you are tempted to call this a private matter, do not. You made it public the moment you used an audience to enforce obedience." I stood there with wine on my face, and felt the balance of the night tip. I took a cocktail napkin from the nearest table and pressed it against my cheek. The stain on the fabric spread fast, dark red against white, and somehow that tiny detail grounded me more than anything else. My father looked stunned, not at what he had done, but at the fact that someone had challenged him. My mother's face had gone pale. Mason kept glancing between the judge and the guests, already understanding that the story leaving this room would not be the one he wanted attached to his wedding photos. Savannah folded her arms around herself like she had just realized she was not standing inside a luxury fantasy. She was standing inside my family's real character. Judge Whitmore remained where she was, calm and unflinching. She did not raise her voice again. She did not need to. The authority was already there. A few guests began whispering to one another. Others stopped pretending not to stare. I noticed at least 6 phones aimed in our direction now. My mother tried first. "Claire, sweetheart, let's all take a breath. This has gotten emotional." I looked at her and said, "Emotional? That is what you're calling this." My father barked, "Don't start acting like a victim." I actually smiled at that, small and sharp. "You threw wine in my face because I would not hand over my house. I do not need to act like anything." My brother finally found his voice. "Claire, maybe we can just talk somewhere private." I turned to him. "Private? You were comfortable enough staying silent while they demanded my property in front of half the guest list. You do not get to ask for privacy now. He flinched, and I knew I had hit the truth. The reason Mason had stayed quiet was simple. Silence was profitable for him. My mother stepped in again, this time sounding more urgent than graceful. No one demanded anything. We were asking for support. Family support. I said, "Support is helping someone who respects your no." This was pressure. This was entitlement. This was all of you deciding that because I built something valuable, it could be reassigned to the son. A few people nearby heard that and shifted uncomfortably. Good. Let them. I was done protecting people from the ugliness of what they were doing. I looked around the room, then back at my family. For 10 years, I worked while the rest of you treated my success like a convenient resource. When there was a gap, I filled it. When there was a mess, I helped clean it up. When one of you needed money, advice, introductions, or damage control, I showed up. And every single time it was called love when I gave, and selfishness when I stopped. My mother's eyes flashed. That is not fair. I ignored her. I paid for my own graduate program. I worked 80-hour weeks when I was barely sleeping. I spent 2 years restoring that house. I signed every contract. I negotiated every permit issue. I stood in ankle-deep floodwater during one storm season making sure the place was protected because I cared that much. Not one of you offered help when it was hard, but now that it is beautiful, now that it represents success, suddenly it belongs in the family. My father said, "You are making a scene." I answered, "No, you already made the scene. I am just telling the truth inside it." Judge Whitmore took one step forward then and said, "Ms. Dalton is correct. Boundaries are not cruelty. Ownership is not selfishness. And adulthood does not disappear simply because parents disapprove of a decision." I could almost feel the room shifting again, guest by guest, table by table. The narrative my parents had tried to control was gone. This was no longer a story about an ungrateful daughter. It was about a woman being publicly cornered for refusing to surrender what was hers. My mother looked around and realized it too. She lowered her voice and hissed, "Claire, stop talking, please." That single word told me everything. Not "Are you all right?" Not "I'm sorry, just stop. Stop making us look like what we are." I said quietly, "No." My voice carried further than I expected. I'm done apologizing for what I have earned. I'm done being treated like family only when I am useful. And I am done letting any of you decide that my life is less valid because I'm not married. There was a silence after that more powerful than the first one. It was not shock anymore. It was judgment. I could see it on the faces around us. A woman near the front table shook her head at my father. One of Savannah's friends looked down in embarrassment. 2 older men who had probably known my father for years suddenly seemed fascinated by their water glasses. My brother tried one last time. "Claire, you know I never wanted this to happen." I said, "Then you should have stopped it before the wine left his hand." He had no answer. Of course he didn't. I took a breath, set the stained napkin down and said, "I am leaving now. I will not argue. I will not negotiate. I will not revisit this next week after everyone decides enough time has passed. The house is mine. That discussion is over." My father muttered something about ingratitude under his breath, but it sounded weaker now, like even he could hear how pathetic it was. Judge Whitmore inclined her head toward me once, a gesture of respect that somehow meant more than all the approval I had chased from my family growing up. I nodded back. Then I turned, lifted my chin, and walked through the center of the ballroom with wine drying on my skin and 300 people watching me leave, with more dignity than the people who had tried to take it from me. By the time I reached the lobby, my phone was already vibrating. First one message, then 5, then a flood. A former client, a college friend, a woman I barely knew writing, "You handled that with more grace than they deserved." Outside in the warm coastal night, I finally checked my screen. Someone had recorded the whole thing from the side of the dance floor. The video was less than a minute long. My mother talking, my father throwing the wine, the gasp, then Judge Whitmore standing. That was all it took. At first, it spread the way stories like that usually do, inside the event itself. Guests shared it in wedding chats. A bridesmaid posted a private story with a shocked caption. A vendor sent it to a friend. Then someone uploaded a cleaner clip without names, and within hours people were identifying the family anyway. I did not need to say a word. The truth moved faster than spin ever could. By midnight, people in Hampton social circles were talking about a father who tried to shame his daughter into giving up her house at a wedding. By morning, the names were circulating. My father's business contacts recognized him. My mother's social circle recognized her. People in luxury sales knew Mason. Someone identified the judge. After that, the story widened fast. I got home, showered, changed, and sat on my sofa with a glass of sparkling water because even the sight of red wine made me feel sick. My phone kept lighting up. Some messages were supportive. Some were angry for me. Some were from women I had not spoken to in years who had lived through versions of the same thing. The successful daughter expected to absorb every burden. The reliable child treated like family property. Those messages mattered more than I expected. They reminded me this was bigger than one wedding. Around 1 a.m, Judge Whitmore texted me, "You conducted yourself with exceptional restraint. Do not let anyone convince you that you were wrong for saying no." I stared at that message for a long time. It felt like someone had finally named what I had known for years, but never said clearly enough. Meanwhile, the wedding I had walked out of was unraveling. One guest texted me, "They're fighting upstairs." Another said, "Mason is blaming your parents. Savannah is blaming him." The after-party was canceled before sunrise. The fallout became real the next afternoon. One of my father's longtime clients emailed asking whether the video was genuine and whether his company should be concerned about Richard Dalton's judgment under pressure. Then another client requested a call. Then a developer paused a proposal meeting. Nobody said the quiet part out loud, but everyone understood it. People with money do not like instability, and they like public humiliation even less. My mother's losses arrived through silence. She was eased off a charity committee. A luncheon invitation vanished. A woman she had called a close friend stopped returning messages. Her entire social identity had been built on being admired, tasteful, and morally polished. The video revealed something else. A woman standing beside cruelty and calling it family duty. My brother and Savannah were hit too. Their wedding photos started circulating beside the story, and strangers immediately asked the obvious question. If two adults were mature enough for a luxury wedding, why were they trying to take a house from his sister? Some people defended them at first. That ended quickly once the video spread further. Mason never stepped in. Savannah never said stop. They were not innocent bystanders. They were beneficiaries. By the second day, the pressure between them had turned ugly. Mason was furious that his wedding had become public humiliation. Savannah was furious that he had let his parents hijack the reception. He blamed her for pushing too hard. She blamed him for hiding behind his family. It was not a new crack. It was the truth finally showing. I kept waiting for guilt to hit me. It never did. Sadness showed up. Disbelief did too, but not guilt. Because I had not created this. I had refused an outrageous demand. They had handled the rest in front of witnesses. That evening, my mother left me a voicemail. Her voice was shaking. "Claire, please call us. This has gone too far. Your father is upset. Mason is devastated. People are being cruel online. We need to fix this as a family." I listened twice, just to be sure. She never once asked if I was all right. The next week felt strange in the best possible way. My phone was still full, but now the messages felt steady rather than chaotic. A mentor from early in my career told me she was proud of me for holding the line. A hospitality executive I respected wrote that she had watched women get punished for boundaries her entire career and hoped I knew how many people were on my side. Even strangers sent painfully honest messages about being the daughter expected to carry everything because competence gets mistaken for unlimited capacity. Those notes mattered. They reminded me this was not just my story. It was a pattern a lot of people knew too well. My father called 3 times in one day. I ignored the first 2 and answered the third. He did not begin with an apology. He began with outrage. "Do you have any idea what this has done to us?" I said. Yes, I think I do. He exhaled sharply. A client postponed a contract over a family incident that had nothing to do with business. I said. Throwing wine in your daughter's face in public says a lot about business judgment, actually. He went quiet, then changed direction. You could stop this if you wanted. One statement, one interview, one post saying we are resolving things privately. There it was. Not remorse. Reputation management. I said, I'm not cleaning this up for you. He used my name the way he had when I was younger, and he wanted obedience more than dialogue. Claire. Enough. Families move on, I said. Real families apologize first. He hung up. My mother tried the softer version the next day. She cried. She said my father had lost control. She said Mason's marriage was already under strain. She said people were being unfair and cruel. When I asked whether she remembered what she had said to me before the wine hit my face, she went silent. Then she said, "We all said things in the moment." I answered, "That's exactly the problem. You still think this is about a moment. It's about a pattern. Years of treating my success like shared family property and my boundaries like betrayal." She asked if we could meet privately, just mother and daughter. I told her no. I said I would not participate in a conversation designed to make everyone comfortable without requiring anyone to change. She cried harder, but what I felt was not cruelty. It was relief. Mason reached out last, and somehow that hurt most. Not because he was angry, but because he sounded small. He asked for a private call. I agreed. He started by saying, "I didn't think Dad would actually do that." I said, "But you thought I might actually give you my house." He let out a long breath. "Claire, I know how bad that sounds," I said. "Then say the true thing instead." He was quiet for a few seconds before finally saying, "I thought you could absorb the loss better than I could absorb not getting it." Hearing him say it plainly made the whole family logic snap into focus. This had never been about fairness. It was about assuming I could take the hit because I always had before. I said, "Thank you for finally saying it honestly." He tried to explain. He said Savannah had always imagined a certain kind of life. He said the wedding costs got out of control. He said our parents kept insisting the house made sense because I split my time anyway. Then he said something that told me his marriage was already sliding. "Savannah keeps asking why I didn't shut it down earlier." I said, "Because you didn't want to lose the possibility of getting what you wanted." He did not deny it. A few days later, Judge Whitmore sent me another short message. "You do not owe reconciliation to people who are apologizing only because the room saw them clearly." I saved it. Not because I needed permission, but because sometimes the right sentence arrives at exactly the right moment. Over the next month, bits of news reached me through other people. My father had grown defensive and volatile at work. My mother insisted the internet had distorted everything. Mason openly blamed them for ruining his wedding. Savannah apparently said she had not signed up to marry into a family where humiliation was a strategy. Nobody seemed very interested in the deeper question of why they had all felt entitled to my house in the first place. That part almost made me laugh. Even with everything collapsing, they still wanted the story to be about consequences, not causes. I never went public. I did not do interviews, write statements, or post captions about healing. My silence became its own refusal. They wanted me to help restore the image they had destroyed. I chose not to. For once, that choice did not make me feel lonely. It made me feel free. 6 months later, the damage had settled into something quieter and more permanent. My father's company still existed, but not the way it had before. One waterfront project was delayed indefinitely after investors raised concerns about leadership volatility. A longtime client shifted a contract elsewhere. Another deal simply never came back after being paused. My father kept insisting business was cyclical, and maybe some of that was true. But public behavior changes how people read private character. The video had not ruined him by itself. It had simply shown people a side of him they could no longer unsee. My mother's losses were social rather than financial, which for her made them no less painful. She was quietly removed from 2 charity committees. A luncheon invitation vanished. Friends who once loved being seen beside her at events began keeping their distance. No one announced her fall. In those circles, they never do. They just stop opening the same doors. Mason's marriage lasted 4 months. That part did not surprise me, though the speed did. From what I heard, the fights never stopped after the wedding. First, it was the video, then the blame, then money, then the deeper issue underneath it all. Savannah realized she had married a man who let his parents define reality for him until the cost became too public to ignore. Mason realized she loved the image of a polished life more than the truth of the family she had married into. The marriage ended the same way it had begun, with fantasy colliding with character. As for me, I kept the house. Not out of stubbornness, out of truth. It was mine before that night, mine during it, and mine after it. But the house changed for me in one important way. For years it had represented security I earned through hard work. After the wedding, it became proof that I was finally willing to protect that security. I stopped seeing boundaries as cold and started seeing them for what they really are, a form of self-respect. I invited real friends out for quiet weekends. We cooked, sat by the water, talked past sunset, and nobody treated the house like leverage or status. It became what home should have been all along, a place where I did not have to earn the right to relax. Professionally, I changed too. I became more selective, less willing to please difficult people just because they were used to being pleased. A few new clients came my way because someone admired how I handled pressure without losing composure. I never turned that night into a brand. I did not want to. But I also stopped running from the lesson inside it. People notice when a woman refuses to negotiate her dignity. Sometimes they punish her for it. Sometimes they trust her more. In my case, both happened, and the second mattered more. Every now and then someone asks whether I regret not smoothing things over sooner. What they usually mean is whether I regret letting my family experience consequences that were uncomfortable to watch. My answer is simple. No. I regret how long I believed peace required my silence. I regret how many times I confused being needed with being valued. I regret every moment I thought love meant making myself smaller so other people could feel bigger. But I do not regret saying no. I do not regret leaving that ballroom. And I do not regret refusing to rescue people from a truth they created with their own hands. The biggest lesson I carried out of that season was not really about revenge, even though people love calling stories like this revenge. Real revenge sounds like plotting, punishment, strategy. What happened here was simpler and more useful. I stopped protecting harmful behavior from its natural consequences. I stopped offering my time, money, and peace to people who believed access to me was automatic. There is something deeply educational in that, especially for anyone raised to believe family must always come before self-respect. Family can be beautiful. Family can be healing. But blood does not turn exploitation into love, and tradition does not make disrespect noble. If someone only celebrates your success when they can benefit from it, that is not support. If someone punishes your boundaries, that is not closeness. And if keeping the peace requires you to hand over your dignity, your property, or your sense of self, then the peace was never real to begin with. The truth is, I did not lose my family that night in the Hamptons. I lost the illusion that they would ever become the family I kept hoping for. What I gained instead was worth more: clarity, freedom, and a life that only got stronger once I stopped handing pieces of it to people who never intended to protect them. So if you have ever been told that love means unlimited sacrifice, let me say this clearly: it does not. Healthy love respects limits. Mature love does not confuse guilt with loyalty. And the people who truly belong in your life will never demand that you break yourself just to prove that you care. The team behind Revenge Broken Trust is working hard to create meaningful, emotional, and well-written stories that offer valuable lessons to our audience. This story is entirely fictional and created for educational purposes, aiming to share useful messages about self-respect, boundaries, and personal growth. Which character did you like the most in this story? and why? Was it Claire, Judge Whitmore, or another character who left the strongest impression on you?